Have you made it live? It's still not live, I think.
Coming.
Achha, okay. Oh.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Future Ready Talents interactive session. Today, we will spend about 90 minutes here, and we will, uh, from the mentor side, mentor team side, we will try and help you with some of the queries that you have been posting on the discussions earlier. We will try and cover a few of the aspects, but we will allow a few more minutes for others to join. So we will start at about in about 4 minutes from now. So we will just wait. We will be on standby, and then we will get started at about 4:35. Hi, good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to the Future Ready Talents interactive session where we, the mentors, will try and help you with some of your queries, the queries that you have already posted on the GitHub discussions. You will have an opportunity to ask questions in the chat window today. So towards the end, we have a session where we will answer some of your queries from the chat as well. So, and apart from that, we have mentors who will continuously answer your queries on the chat right away. So please utilize this opportunity to ask any doubts that you have. And today we will primarily focus on queries around the Azure and the GitHub, etc. So most of the technical aspects that you may want to uh, get your doubts clarified here. My name is Alok, and I will be presenting you some of these aspects today. So let me get started with the agenda first, and then we will move on to the main discussion. All right, so we have structured this session today. We will start with spending few minutes on giving you an overview on the Azure services, the type of services that are available to you. We have identified few services which are very critical for application development, etc. So we will talk about those services. While we have very limited time, we will cover only two services briefly. I will give you certain demos as well. Then we will move on to a section where we will talk about how you decide for a particular service. There are hundreds of services that are available to you on the Azure uh, environment. So how do you choose one service over the other? Or why would you choose one particular service to achieve one capability? There can be many services which provide you overlapping functionalities or features, etc. So we will give you some aspects about how you can make a decision on choosing one service over the other. We will cover some of the Azure best practices around, uh, say, while you're designing an application, while you would be creating your projects and you want to design your applications, these best practices would be something that you can take as a baseline or guidance for you. These best practices can be considered while you're designing your applications. And beyond that, when you say beyond the projects as well, when you want to design any application for your requirements, you would consider these best practices and implement those. One of the important phases for this virtual internship program is the project submission on GitHub. So I'm going to give you a walkthrough on how these can be uploaded to the Git repositories and how you can publish them and make them available to us. It's very important that you upload all your artifacts onto the GitHub, make them available to us, and provide us a link to see that you have uploaded an working version of the application. So I will show you how you can do that. Next, we have a team coming to us who will talk to you. These are students like you who have participated in the Imagine Cup India and the global event. So these are innovators who were the winners for India geography, and they were runners up in the global arena. So they will talk about how they went ahead, uh, identifying designing a project, and then presenting them at various forums. So this would give you a good insight into how you can think about a project and create a exciting project. Now, we would also want to answer most of your queries and questions that you have been asking through the GitHub discussions. So queries that you would cover or ask in today's chat session. We will select few of those queries, some of the queries which have been asked in the discussion forums earlier, or some of the queries that are coming in today's discussion. We will cover them into the Q&A section. So that's the agenda for today's close to 90 minutes session. Now, let me start with the first section, where we will cover the Azure Services overview and the demo. As I said, on this topic, we will talk about some of the topics that we consider are very important for you to know, and this will give you information about the various aspects about implementing one of the services on the Azure environment. Let me start with giving you an overview of the various services that are available to you on the Azure. There are over 200 services that are available. So my screen would be not sufficient to include all of them. I have included some of the important services. When you go on to the Azure portal, you will see there are various categories of services, or services are categorized into various blocks. So you will see them into categories like AI and machine learning, analytics, compute, databases, etc. And each of these categories would consist of many services that can be used, and they might have overlapping capabilities in terms of the offerings. Now, in today's world, we have, if you look at the first two, the Azure machine learning, the AI, analytics, these are something which are extensively used across the IT projects today. Then you have DevOps, you have IoT. IoT is again very significantly used in industrial automation. When you want to keep looking at the signals coming from various devices, sensors, etc., then you use the IoT capabilities. So Azure provides you a host of these services, and if I move here, you will see you have capabilities to integrate different services. For example, when I'm running my applications on a cloud environment, I would create modular applications. Modular applications would mean that I create certain functionality, say a smaller functionality, and then I call multiple such modules to achieve a larger capability. Instead of running a very large code, I will create small modules to specifically provide me certain capabilities. So what's the advantage? These give me the advantage that my projects can be more agile. I do not have to spend a lot of time in integration testing. So if I am developing a very large application, and if I make a minor change in one of the functionalities or modules, I will have to go ahead and test the entire application so that I can ensure that everything works well. But when we talk about the modular code, we would only worry about some of the components, and as long as individual components work well, the overall applications would work well. So if I make a small change, I can only take care of testing that on a module rather than the entire application. So just to give you an example of how this has changed the whole scenario is, earlier, say we take an example of Microsoft itself. You might have heard of examples, the previous versions like Windows 2012, 2016, 2019, etc. So you will see there is a gap of 3 to 4 years between every release or every major version between them. But today, when we talk about Office 365, there are feature releases every month. So the advantage is from the IT developer side that they would only worry about testing the code that they have recently created. In terms of maintaining this code, you would use technologies like DevOps, etc. And from the end user perspective, the advantage is they would always get the latest developed applications and the features being rolled out to them quickly. They don't have to wait for months or years before these functionalities can be available to them. So on Azure, you have capabilities for maybe you want to migrate your on-premises applications. There are tools available for that. You may want to replicate your on-premises networking, where you have a huge role of virtualization and creating subnets to secure your infrastructure. So all of those capabilities are replicated onto the Azure cloud or the public cloud infrastructure as well. And in most of the capabilities that you require on an enterprise environment, which you have been using on the on-premises environment, would also be available to you on the cloud environment. It could be in a different form, but those capabilities would be available to you. And many a times, because of the new invent of the cloud environment, you will have far greater capabilities onto the cloud environment. For example, if we talk about security on the cloud environment, public clouds are considered to be the most secured IT infrastructures that have ever been built. Now, this used to go against the perception. People were very worried about moving their data and applications onto the cloud. But over a period of time, there has been a lot of sense of confidence in terms of how these environments provide you the security capabilities and provide you greater security than most of the enterprises can ever afford. So that's a quick overview on some of the important services. Maybe we may also want to talk about the storage and the database capabilities. On Azure environment, when you look at the huge size of data that's being handled on these public cloud infrastructures, there are different type of data that you handle. You will have structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. Now, when we have designed these services on the Azure environment, there are specific services which are optimized for handling one type of the data set over the other. So while you're planning or choosing your services, you can always look at some of these aspects on what would be the optimized way in which we can store the data. I will give you an example here. For example, if we take a hierarchy and we take an hierarchy of an organization, say. So there are individuals who report into somebody. Individuals will have their managers. They use certain applications within their organization. They will require access to the applications, etc. So this is a very, say, varied kind of a structure that you may want to store. And this is what is required on your Azure's Active Directory or your corporate Active Directory. So when you want to store such information, the relational databases like SQL or Oracle are not the optimal choices for you. So instead of that, we choose a graph kind of a database. So if we look at from the support perspective on the Azure environment, you have Cosmos DB, which provides you the graph database capability. So other example could be if I want to store media files. Now, while RDBMS also supports the blob storage, but you can choose the Azure Blob Services, which are optimized for keeping these large binary objects. So these are the unstructured data. So similarly, you have various services which can offer you optimized services on one specific requirement for you. So while you're designing your, the cloud infrastructure, while you're designing your applications, you can keep some of these aspects into consideration and then choose a particular service. Where do you find the information about these? If you go to docs.microsoft.com, which is the parent repository of the Azure information, as this is an official Microsoft repository, you would already be accessing, most of you would already be accessing this. Now, all the information that comes to you is authentic Microsoft information coming from Microsoft itself. And this is one of the most updated repository. So Azure being a very dynamic environment, the services would keep on changing, the capabilities would keep on changing. And if you go to docs.microsoft.com, here you can look at the most updated information. So on the docs.microsoft.com/Azure, you will also find the service descriptions for the Azure services, which will give you detailed information about how these services are, what these services are offering you, what are the limits, what will be the cost, what are considerations that you should take care, what are the SLAs these services will provide you, which geographies these services are available to you, etc. So there are multiple aspects which would be available to you in these service descriptions. All right, so let's move to the second topic here, which is I consider this as a very important aspect when you're deploying or developing an application. On a cloud environment, security is very, very important. Now, the security on the cloud infrastructure revolves around the identity of a person. Now, many years back, when we used to talk about the perimeter security, you would have an environment where the users would have a corporate device which is owned by the organization, and they would go into the office and connect the device and gain access to the corporate environment, corporate IT resources. But over a period of time, now with the advent of mobility, you're not good enough to have everybody connect to the corporate network every time from one single device, etc. Now you want to give flexibility to these users. So look at this scenario where you have spread out your IT resources across various platforms and various environments. You might run some of these applications on premises. So today the reality is every enterprise who have been running, or they are large, who have been running for many years would definitely have some IT infrastructure that they have deployed within their data centers. But with the advent of cloud technologies, they surely have a roadmap for hosting some of these applications onto the cloud applications, public cloud infrastructure. So these cloud infrastructures could be run by Microsoft, which is the Azure cloud. This can be a third-party cloud like AWS, Google, or these can be SaaS applications like ServiceNow, Workday, Box, Salesforce, etc. So now you look at the variation that you have and the diversity that you have in hosting your application, etc. Similarly, now you're not good enough to just access the applications, corporate applications from one single resource, one single device. You want the access maybe from your workstations, maybe from your laptops, mobile devices, tablets, and in some cases, you may connect from the IoT devices. You may want your CCTV cameras, printers, and host of smart devices like smartwatch, smart TV, etc. to be connected. And all of this revolves around the identity of a person. So when I have an access to a resource, IT resource within my organization, I may want to have a seamless access from all of these devices to all of these platforms, infrastructure where I'm running these applications. And then the last bit is about who can gain access to these resources. You may have employees who have the IDs on the Azure Active Directory or your on-premises Active Directory, or there may be partners or customers who do not have any ID, corporate ID within your organization. So these may come in with another corporate ID, or they might come in with public IDs as well. Public IDs, for example, your Microsoft IDs, Live ID, live.com, outlook.com, hotmail.com, Skype, or maybe your Xbox. So there can be multiple public IDs that you may want to allow or let the users come in and get authenticated on your environment. So that's about the identity of your environment and why it's very critical. When you want to decide who gains access to your environment, it's decided by the identity. There are two aspects that we covered in identity. You have authentication and authorization. Authentication is just validating if the user is a valid user, and authorization is about to what extent a user can gain access within your application. So that's about your identity, and today we are using the identity as the control plane of our applications and in the cloud space. So here, so we spoke about identity, and the core for providing the identity on the Azure cloud is the Azure's Active Directory. So you will see all of the blocks that we had seen in detail there are grouped here, like where you have the Microsoft cloud, the Azure, and the M365 cloud. You have the cloud SaaS applications, on-premises applications, and then various devices. So Azure Active Directory takes the responsibility of providing you a seamless access to all of these applications. While if you want to access this application hosted here, or thousands of applications which are hosted on the SaaS platforms, you do not want your users to have different credentials, username and passwords for accessing these. So Azure Active Directory takes the responsibility of providing you authentication, authorization, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, etc. So there are multiple aspects that can be taken care by these. Next, we will talk about the Microsoft's identity platform. Now, while I said Azure Active Directory takes the responsibility of providing the authentication and authorization, we will just look at quickly on the two different versions that Microsoft has made available for the developers. So first is the Azure Active Directory 1.0, version 1.0, which provided capability or the APIs to get your authentications for your work or school identities, which means only the IDs which are created on the Azure Active Directory. While today on the what we call as the Microsoft Identity Platform 2.0, here we support multiple such identities. So you can support the IDs which are on the Azure Active Directory, the personal accounts which are the Microsoft accounts. I just spoke about them, Hotmail, Live, Outlook, etc. And then your social or local accounts. So Facebook, Twitter, Google, LinkedIn, many of such IDs are supported for authentication here. In terms of authentication, there are four common flows. I will very quickly cover these. So interactive authentication, as the name suggests, this is where you will have users could have an interaction with the application. So this is one of the most common ways in which you get authenticated. So when you log into an application, say a web app or a cloud app, you will get a prompt or a dialog box which asks you to provide a username and a password. So that's the interactive authentication. So when the user sends a request, the request will be sent to the Azure Active Directory, a token will be generated, and then the token will be sent to the request along with the token will be sent to the Microsoft Graph where the authentication would happen. Similarly, the second one is on behalf of authentication. And in this mode, this is very common when you have multi-tier applications. For example, a front end requesting the back end on requesting the authentication on behalf of the user to the backend. Generally, the users would only be provided access to the front-end applications or the web applications, while the databases would not be published or they will not provide any access to the end users. So in those scenarios, the applications will authenticate the users on behalf of the databases, and then the information will be provided or the data will be retrieved and sent across to the end users. So that's called as the on behalf of authentication. The third type is the client credentials, where these are pre-generated credentials from the applications, which would be sent across in the request that comes in from the client, and these will help to gain the access to your applications. And the last is the device code authentication. So many of you would have used this mode of authentication when you're validating or authenticating yourselves on Xbox or smart TVs, etc. This is used on devices where you do not have the web browsers and the capability to enter the code. So instead of putting the say the password or OTP onto the device itself, you will use another device which has a browser, could be a laptop or a mobile phone, and then the code can be entered into that device. So many a times you might have used this kind of a capability. If you have not used this, just simply take it like I'm trying to log into a smart TV where I do not have a good interface to enter a code. That interface will appear on my mobile phone. I will enter the code on my mobile phone, and the actual authentication for my smart TV would happen on the smart TV. Now I will quickly show you a demo of implementing the user authentication and the authorization. So this is an important aspect when you're creating an application. As a developer, you do not want to create your own authentication and authorization mechanism. You would rely on existing authorization mechanism, which gives you the capability to have a centralized, scalable, and redundant kind of environment. So Azure Active Directory provides you this capability. So let me quickly show you how this works on the Azure Active Directory. So for whenever you're trying to use uh, Azure Active Directory as the authentication mechanism for your application, you would have to let the Azure Active Directory know that I am relying on you for authentication and authorization. So we will first go to the Azure Active Directory, and we will create or register the application, which will help us to let the Azure Active Directory know that I want to uh, authenticate against the Azure Active Directory. So let me go start from the on the Azure portal. I am on the home page. I will go onto the Azure Active Directory, and I will register a new application here. So for that, if you look at the left side menu, you will have an option for app registrations. I will go here, and I do not have any apps registered here. At the top, I have an option for new registrations. So I will go and choose this. I will provide a name here. So I'm going to call it as AZ204 app demo here. And within the supported accounts, you will see here you have 4 options. Depending on whom you want to provide the access, you want to provide access to only one domain, multiple domains within your organization, multiple domains with personal accounts, or only the personal accounts. At this point, I'm going to choose the default directory, the single tenant, which is for people only within my organization. And then I would create a application. So I would, whenever I send a request, the Azure Active Directory will respond back on a particular URI. So that's called as a redirect URI. So I will choose, at this point, I'm going to create a public client or a native mobile or a desktop application, and then I will provide the location of that application. So I'm going to call this as, this is on my local host. So with this information, I will register this application. It will take a minute or so. So now you see this application is registered, and it will go back to the overview page where you can see the application ID, the object ID, and the tenant ID. So when I use this application, when I want to reference this application from my code, I will require this client ID as well as the tenant ID. I have a demo where I have a code that I would like to show you here. So let me go to the Visual Studio Code, and okay, let me go back to the, Let me open the right folder here. So first, let me show you the code, and then we will. Right. So whenever I am writing these codes, first I will define the namespace. So here I am using the identity.client as my namespace. And as I said, I'm going to use the client ID and the tenant ID to reference these. I will bring the new IDs that I have just, the IDs that I have created. Then I'm defining my redirect URI here. And once I establish a connection with the application, I am doing a acquire token interactive. So I want to acquire token interactively, and then I am writing the token onto the command line. So let me go and pick up the IDs. We will use these to connect. First, I am taking the client ID. I will update it here. I will go and pick up the tenant ID. Update this here. Save this, and then I will go on to the terminal and run this. So I can go on to the new terminal and I can run this. So when I execute this, the expected behavior is, as I am running this application for the first time, like you might have seen this many a times when you download a new application on your mobile phones, it asks you to grant the permissions. It will ask you to grant the permission. Then, as this is an interactive authentication, it will prompt me to enter my credentials. And when I put my valid credentials, it will show me that I have successfully validated. I am successfully validated, and my authentication is complete. So let me run this application. So as I said, the expected behavior is it should prompt me for so here you see it prompts me for providing the credentials. I will choose my credentials. It asks me for permissions. So I can either give permissions only for myself, or uh, I can consent on behalf of the organization. As I'm the global admin, I would have those privileges. For all the users, you would not get this option. And then I would accept this. When I accept this, as my credentials are valid, it says authentication complete. You can return to the application and you can close the browser window. Now, I go to the application. I have uh, I have written the token that's associated to my authentication onto the command line. So you see here, this is the token. So every request that goes to the application will go with this token so that the users can be authenticated. So this is the demo of how you can interact with your MSAL or the authentication library. And second part of this demo is where I would show you to read the properties of the users from the graph. So let me close this, go to another demo. And I will update these keys here. So these are the new keys or the IDs. So let me first show you the code here. Here as well, I'm doing interactive authentication. I'm registering the provider, and then I'm doing a user.read. So within this, I am instantiating this client. Then I'm doing a client.me and the properties. So I am going to read these properties like me.display, me.id, etc. So the expected behavior, it will prompt me for an authentication. When I provide the authentication, it should give me the display name and the ID. So let me again execute this. So it prompts me for the credentials. I provide them, and then it says authentication complete. You can close this. So let's go to the app now and see it has published my display name and the Azure Active Directory ID. And both of these are read from the Graph database, the Microsoft Graph database. So that's about a demo on the MSAL here. Second important component that I will talk here is the Azure Key Vault. This is so you might be familiar of a term called Vault, which we generally use to secure our valuables. For example, you take a bank locker. So that's a vault that you have within your bank where you generally keep your gold, silver, property papers, etc. And maybe some of you have seen them in hotels, some of you might have seen them at home as well. So similarly, Microsoft provides you a vault on the cloud environment to safeguard your secrets, your certificates, credentials, application configurations, etc. So now this is a redundant, highly available service, and how this is more secure than your authentication that you do on the Azure Active Directory. These are protected by encryptions, and these are also backed up by HSMs, which are hardware security modules. So they work as an additional layer of security onto your uh, additional layer of security in protecting your confidential or secrets. So this is a cloud-based service, highly available, scalable, and redundant. So you would not, while you're running your modular applications, if you keep applications close to the applications or on the application server itself, if the application server is experiencing downtime or performance issues, other modules might also get impacted. But as Azure Key Vault comes as a centralized service, this will help you to provide a consistent experience to the end users. So where you can create the uses for this, you can store your encryption keys, API keys, secrets, passwords, and your certificates. Many of you who might have thought about how do you secure your data. One of the most trusted way to secure your data on the cloud platforms is encryption. Today, you do a 256-bit encryption, which is practically considered to be, say, unbreachable today. There are no reported instances where this level of encryption has been breached. In such scenarios, if while encryption is helping you to safeguard your data, what happens if you lose the keys which are used to decrypt this data? Practically, you will lose the data if you lose these keys. So you can trust on the Azure Key Vault to keep these keys, and there will be multiple copies of these keys which will be managed by the Azure Key Vault. Beyond the Azure Key Vault, there are two types of IDs that we will talk about. Now, if you look at from the application perspective, the identity of the users plays a major role in terms of how you authenticate and authorize the users for accessing any IT resources. So would you want these to be managed by the administrators, or would it be better if you let that be managed by the Azure itself? So whenever we look at the term called managed, this is something, these are services which are fully managed by Azure themselves. So when we say fully, the design, building these services, running these services, upgrading these services, all of those will be Microsoft's or Azure's responsibility. So customers would gain benefit that they don't have to manage these or they do not have to worry about the life cycle of these identities. All of these would be managed by Microsoft themselves. Customers would just worry about creating and removing the IDs. Whole of the infrastructure for managing these IDs would be provided, identities would be provided by Microsoft. So there are two types of identities that we will talk about, and these are the important ones. So there are two, considering the importance of these identities, you have two types of identities. You have system assigned and the user assigned identities. And if you look at this, there are managed identities which are associated to a specific resource. So these system assigned identities are identities which have life cycle associated to a resource. So if I'm creating a container instance, I will create an ID for accessing this container. And whenever I'm deleting that container, I will delete that identity as well. Similarly, for any of these resources and many more, these resources, these IDs will share the life cycle with the identity, with your resources. While user assigned identities are where you first create your resources, you create your identities, and then provide the access to specific resources. So for example, if I have a user in the IT department, the user might have access to different resources than a user in the admin, HR, finance department, etc. So user assigned identities would be where I first create the IT identities and then assign the privileges to them. And those are not associated to the life cycle of the resources. Irrespective of when I create a virtual machine or when I delete the virtual machine, these IDs would still be relevant. So these are the two types of IDs, and depending on the type of usage, you can choose which one you would like to use. I will quickly show you a demo, and I have specifically chosen a demo on the Azure CLI here so that now you get an exposure to that as well. So let me move to the demo on the CLI. I will use the Cloud Shell to show you this demo. For Cloud Shell, I will go to shell.azure.com, or I can go to portal.azure.com/cloud shell, and then I can connect to one of the options. So you have PowerShell and you have Bash. So right now I'm going to use the PowerShell script. So that's why I have chosen the PowerShell here, and this is my shell on the cloud, which allows me to run my PowerShell scripts. And as Microsoft manages this, all your modules will always be updated here, and you can easily use them. First, I will create 3 variables, which I'm going to use in my later steps. So I'm going to create a variable called my resource group. So AZ204 Vault. Then I have a key vault name AZ204 Vault, and then my location. Location is the physical data center where I am hosting my resources. So I'm using East US because my current tenant is configured for East US, and all of your Azure passes are also configured for East US. So try and use all of these on the East US. Whenever you are creating your resources, create them on East US. Next, I am going to use the script AZ, which is the module for my CLI group. I want to create a resource group. So this is my resource name. Then the action that I want to take, create, and then I will take the I'm going to take the variable. I'm going to use the variables for creating these. So let me create this now. So I have successfully created a Vault, a resource group named AZ204 Vault TRG, Vault RG, and this is succeeded. So next, I will create a key vault. For creating the key vault, again, I have a similar command, AZ key vault, create name of the resource group, and the location. So in a moment, you will see this being created. And beyond this, I will create a secret, and I will give the name of the secret as example password. Now this is created. You will see this has succeeded. Let me go and create the secret. Secret name is example password, and the value is this. Next, I will show you how to retrieve this. So when I created, so here I define the action. Here I had said set, which is like update, and now I'm using show. So I want to read the value of the example password, and I will run this command now, and I should see this value coming into me. So here you see this is the value which is retrieved from the key vault. So let me quickly show you how this looks on the portal. So I will go to the resource group. I have created a 204 Vault TR Vault RG. So let me go here. Within this, I will see this key vault, and in the key vault, I will look at the secrets. And In a moment, you should see example password as the key, as the secret here. If you go here, it will give you the secret, and if I do a show secret, I can see the value also. Now, when I want to use this, I will use this URL here. So when you are writing a code, you can copy this secret identifier and use this to point it to a specific secret that we have created. All right, so that's all I wanted to show you. As a best practice, we should delete all the resources that we do not target to use so that you don't burn out your credits. I'm going to run this command, and I'm intentionally doing this so that you remember whenever you're not using your resources, you should delete your resources. So we run this. It will take a while to do this. We will move to another. We will move to the next option now. Now we will talk about some of the best practices on the Azure environment. And now we would be short of time, so we would quickly be covering some of these aspects. So we will quickly cover some of the aspects on the best practices. So the first best practice is to co-locate. Co-location, in terms of if you have multi-tier applications, the best possible performance would come in when your application and the databases or any other tier that you're using are on the same Azure region or within the same data center itself. So ideally, you will try and keep them close to each other. There can be scenarios where you want geo redundancy, etc., but not every time you would need them. So as far as possible, co-location will give you the best performance. So this is one of the best practice which will provide you low latency communication on your applications. And when you have applications and the data going from one region to another, you might also incur higher charges based on the output data transfer. So again, co-location will be helpful for such scenarios as well. So as far as possible, you should keep them co-located. In terms of protecting your data, we treat the data in two major states, the data at rest and the data in transit. And why we are specifically highlighting this is there are very different mechanisms and ways in which you protect the data in different states. So, for example, when the data is on the hard disk or any storage, we call that as the data at rest. And the best possible way to protect that data would be the data encryption, and which will be provided to you by the storage encryption service, SSE. While if I am talking about a data which is moving on the network or which is moving between the resources, I would protect that by using TLS or SSL. And the mechanism is very different from the data encryption. So the best practice is we should adapt to encryption on different scenarios and take care of each of them. Then in terms of strong network controls, these are aspects about creating virtual networks, providing segregations. By default, all the incoming traffic on the Azure environment is blocked. So you will have to open up your firewall only for the traffic which you want to allow. Store your secrets and certificates into your key vault. I've just spoken about this a lot. Then, if your applications are seeing spikes or your higher utilizations on your applications, you should think about scaling up and scaling down your app services. Whenever you see a spike, you may want to increase your resources. While that will enhance the end user experience, but that will also cost you money. So there should always be a balance between the optimization on the end user perspective and the money that you spend. So you can optimize on that. Second is optimizing your uptime and the performance. So this is where you would decide in terms of, I spoke about co-location earlier. So how do I optimize the end user experience by, if I keep the data closest to the users, then the end user experience would be optimal. But would that increase the cost of my applications, or I'm fine with bearing more cost and providing a high-end or a optimal experience to the user? So that's something that you can again optimize. The next is adopt a zero trust approach. Zero trust approach is where I would consider every request that's coming to me for my application as a breach within my environment. Unless I validate the request, I would not provide provide the access to these users or the request. And then you will use private endpoints to secure your critical Azure resources. Private endpoints are secured endpoints which are configured on the, which are available to you on the Azure environment, which you can point to a specific resource. Well, in terms of choosing some of the services on the Azure environment, there are multiple considerations about if you're going to use DevOps within your environment, where you automate all the process of writing your code, pushing that to production. How often would you push that code, etc.? The scalability that you require. Is your application very dynamic, which has very varying demand, etc.? So you can look at the scalability, then how critical is the availability for you? What happens if an application is down for half an hour versus if it's a highly critical application, you may not want it to be down for a minute as well. But there can be non-critical applications where you might be okay for a half an hour downtime also. So those aspects would also be considered. Then security of those applications, limits and cost. So the services that are being offered to you on the Azure environment have certain limits in terms of their usage, and there are costs associated to it. So you should be aware about the limits and the cost associated with running an application. Some of the while most of the services are available globally, some of the services may only be available in specific geographies. So you should know those limits. There may be limits in terms of the physical usage of the infrastructure. So maybe some service only supports, say, I'm just taking a number. In general, cloud provides you infinite resources, but maybe max you can go up to 100 instances of a resource. So you should know those kind of limits. And in terms of decision tree, this you can go by a flowchart in terms of what would be the critical capabilities that you want to implement, and you will see there based on the flowchart decisions on the flowchart in terms of yes and no. you can make certain decisions in terms of different services. Similarly, this is an example of a decision tree on the Azure data store. The first one was on the compute infrastructure. So where you would use a SQL versus Cosmos DB, Azure files, etc., you can use some of these decision trees. And maybe I'll provide you the link to these so that you can look at them in detail. And now I will show you a quick demo on the GitHub on how you can create a repository here. I'll not take, so you should have an account on the GitHub. Okay, let me do it on a different browser. So here you see you have, I'm logged into my GitHub account, and at the top here you go on the plus and you will see an option for repository. So you can create a repository here, give a name here. You can choose if you want to keep a public or a private, and then you can add your files from here. So you can create these repositories. We have short of time, so I'm not going to spend time here, but you can quickly add some of them. And then important aspect would be when you're creating this, it will ask you to provide a URL. So maybe I'll show you this. If I go to a repository, one of my existing repository, on the right hand side, it will give me this URL. So ensure that the application that you want to publish or show your project evaluators, they have the right link where they can click and run the application from here. So that's about your GitHub repositories. So with that, I will move to the next team, the Imagine Cup winners team, who will walk you through their very exciting journey on their innovations. Yeah, so I would invite Rishika to please start.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Good evening, sir. Hey everyone, we are Team Detected, this year's Imagine Cup India champion and world finalists. So before that, we were just engineering students with a passion for technology and a strong desire to develop solutions that would have even the smallest positive impact in the society. But the best ideas strike in the most unexpected places. And the idea for our defect detection platform struck me when I was interning at a forensic investigation firm. So during my time there, I came across a few projects and soon realized the threat manipulated media posed to people and how criminals were leveraging it for their own benefits. Our team did some research about this problem on the internet, and soon we came across something new, which was deepfake. So using artificial intelligence to manipulate videos which had even dire consequences. So this was the moment when we knew that we wanted to work on something to solve this issue. And after a bit more research, we found out that while there were deepfake detection platforms at the global level, we had none in India. So even the ones that existed were available only to specific institutions and not to the general public. So now I guess I'll let Yash to go further with the solution part.
Yeah, so am I audible?
Yes, Yash.
Yeah. So through our research, we knew that we had to develop an AI model for detecting deepfakes, but unfortunately, we didn't have the data. So we searched online, and fortunately, we found a challenge hosted on the website Kaggle that had a similar competition theme. We used this data that was freely available to anyone. After this, there was no going back. We then focused on refining our problem statement. We had to do something that was within our capabilities in terms of our skills, time, and resources. So we narrowed the problem down until we were confident about completing the project and still having a significant positive impact. So once we defined our problem statement, we started identifying the Azure services that would help us develop and deploy our solution. Even though we did not have prior knowledge about all the services we used, we learned a lot of new things from YouTube, blogs, and especially the official Azure documentation. So when we were developing the solution, we had a lot of situations when the bugs were just unsolvable, and we thought we had hit a dead end, but we didn't let that dissuade us and give up on the project. Eventually, we deployed the project just on time, 2 hours before Imagine Cup had submission deadline, and ultimately won the Indian Championship. Now, I'd like Atharva Khedkar to elaborate further, please.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So basically, based on our story, these are some key takeaways that I want you guys to know. Next slide. The okay, so basically what we did was some key points for you are to identify your solution. So to identify, you just have to keep one thing in mind, that idea could be anywhere and you just have to look around. Okay, so identify the problems near you. They could be from smallest to biggest. So we found that deepfakes are upcoming problem and we had to do something about it, right? Then after identification, what you have to do is you have to validate your idea. And validating means you just have to break down the problems and see what already has been done. You can find like research papers, existing solutions, find the pain points. Further, we'll discuss on this, that how to do each step. So followed by validation, you have to refine. And what do you mean by refine is, like, for example, world hunger. So it's a really big problem, but what part could you play in it? Okay, so similarly, any type of media could be manipulated to spread misinformation, but what can we do? So we as a team, what part could we play in? So we selected images and videos and created a platform to detect these deepfakes. So similarly, identify how can you solve and how can you help to solve a particular problem you have selected. So for example, how could you solve world hunger? What part could you play in? Okay, so after refining, what you can do is you materialize. So break down the solution you plan, okay, and select the Azure technologies you are going to use or may need to use. So we knew that we had to build an easy to use platform, and we knew that we had to select some services. So for example, we selected Azure App Services and Machine Learning Studio, Active Directory, and of course Azure Bot Services to assist our users. So similarly, try to figure out what could come in handy to build your solution. And now, as you have a general idea of this, after building, what you have to do is you have to just start learning. So start learning, explore around these technologies, how you can help, like how you can use them and how they can help to build your solution. So just build your solution, get a prototype ready. And then once you have developed it, you don't have to stop there. Okay, you have to just constantly improve it. So make sure that you constantly improve your solution. It could be adding some new, let's say some new technologies, or it could be even to just clean off some bugs. Okay, so continuous integration and development, it's necessary. And this is the final stage and how to do these things. So I think you have a basic idea of what steps are required, but how to achieve this. So I guess, Peshkar, would you like to discuss on this? Peshkar, I guess you are on mute.
Hello. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah. The identify part one. Now that Atharva Khedkar has already given you a sort of map that you can follow to get to your final project, that is pretty impressive for your internship and also does have a positive impact in the society. There are some parts in this map like identifying the idea or validating it or even materializing it that can be pain points for us developers as students, right? So I'm going to give you an idea about how do you go about identifying a good problem statement and then validating it and then ultimately materializing it. So to identify a problem, first of all, you have to look around yourself or even into your personal experiences or daily life. If you're able to find a good enough problem there, the one that you are facing, and of course you won't be the only person who is facing that problem, right? So you can identify a problem from your surroundings or your daily life. But if you are unable to find a problem there, in that case you should, as students, we should follow multiple technical newsletters, magazines, social media accounts of research laboratories, technology companies, because these are and technical newsletters from organizations like India AI or national technology bodies, right? Because these are the bodies that constantly keep on posting about the technological landscape, the new challenges and the solutions, right? So these are the sources where you could get an idea. Also, if you are not able to figure out something from these platforms, you could straight away go to platforms like Kaggle or Machine Hack, right? And these are the platforms wherein organizations or technology companies, they post challenges that they are facing with data sets. And so this can help you get a really good idea about what are the challenges that top companies or even other bodies are facing, and you can build your solution around that. Now to validate that idea, in when you identify a problem through your personal experiences, technical newsletters and stuff, you can simply validate through internet searches, right? Because you'll find multiple news articles or blogs on those topics. In other cases, you could go through research papers on Google Scholar, or simply you can, conduct polls or post questions on social media to let other users answer your questions or take the polls. That can again help you validate your idea in that case. So reaching out to people is a very important part to validating your idea. In our case, as Rishita told you that when she was interning at the forensic investigation firm, she identified the problem from there and validated it there itself, right? Now, refinement is again a team task or an individual task, depending. You need to just sit down with a pen and paper or some tools, and you need to refine your problem so that you're able to achieve that with your current capabilities. In order to materialize, as Khedkar told, you have to divide your solution into multiple subparts and then try developing those individual components and then integrate them, right? So this requires a lot of learning, because when you're trying to build something new, there are going to be situations where you don't understand a new technology or you have just come to know that technology, right? So even though the EY, NASCOM, and Microsoft team has given you a thorough background on various Azure technologies, there still might be situations where you need to try something new. So in those cases, you should reach out to sources like YouTube or even the popular platform Coursera that would provide you courses on those things. But again, the best resources are Microsoft's learning paths. So they actually give you a idea from beginner to intermediate to advanced level courses on multiple Azure services or the official documentation or even blogs posted by other people. So you can easily learn new technologies from these resources and then materialize your solution, right? After that, it's all up to you to develop, deploy, and then improve your solution. Thank you. Let's take some questions from students.
Okay, so do we have any questions? Moderators, are there any questions that you want Athar to answer?
Yes, Alok. So basically, there is a common questions we are getting from most of the students about the project synopsis. What project they should choose. So
Yeah.
from your experience, students. So what do you think?
Vaibhav, right now, any specific question for Athar?
No, no.
Okay, all right.
Just
So,
wanted to know about the experience of about their journey about these projects. I mean, their progresses.
right.
If they can
So,
share the same with the team.
do you want to cover that?
Yeah, I mean, we've already shared the journey where we developed the projects. So again, as we said that we did identify the problem as misinformation, which was quite large and beyond our capabilities. But I think the main thing that students need to remember is that they can still have a positive impact even if they refine their problem statement to solve a very specific pain point, right? And that also simplifies things for you because we see that you're either a group of 4 or 5 people or individual contributors. So you should really focus on solving a particular pain point and not, tackling a very large issue at once. Also, learning new things is a very important thing because, and also first focusing on the problem and not on the technologies is what students need to learn, right? Because we did fall for this trap earlier during the detected platform development where we were first trying to identify the technologies and then build a solution around that. So I think this is a major pitfall that we all as students need to allow because focusing on the problem is the main thing. And once you're focused on the problem, refined it, distributed into several components that can be independently developed, at this point of time, you should start thinking about, structuring your project using various Azure services and all those things. So keep in mind that focusing on the problem is the main part and focusing on the technology comes after that. And
Can
I'm sure
Athar,
that
can you also share your experience on the challenges which you have faced during your journey? What challenges occurred during your this onboarding or on all your project journey? So will you be able to
right.
share that also?
Yeah.
What challenges were there?
So yeah. So the two major places where we faced our challenges were during the validation stage and during the development stage. So first of all, to validate our ideas, we didn't know where to reach out. So we went through a lot of resources on the web, talked to our mentors, and at this point of time, we tried to identify the people who would be affected by our solution in a positive manner, right? So we started reaching out to forensic investigators, and at this point of time, even we went to the cyber police station, the cyber command of the police, and then we tried talking to those people there. And we did receive a lot of suggestions and points that we could include in our solution later on. So always try to interact with people who are going to be positively affected by your solutions because then at this they can give you important pointers about what functionality that they require in your solution. And then during development, don't let the bugs dissuade you from developing your solution. Because if you search enough on the internet through various blogs, resources, you come across solutions to your bugs. So I think that would be a major part because when we were developing a solution, we came across a very peculiar bug that existed in TensorFlow and we struggled with it for about 2 weeks or so. But ultimately we did figure out. So I think you shouldn't let that take you down. You should
Thanks,
try working
thanks, Athar.
towards developing your project anyhow.
Thanks, Athar, for your opinion. Over to you, Alok.
All right. Thanks, Athar. So let's move to the project timelines now. And many of you would have attended the earlier orientation sessions. You would have seen some of these dates. So these are the most recent dates that you will see here. And of course, these are your current timelines. There can be changes to these, but as of now, we are here. So we are doing the project mentoring session. Your project submission would have started by now. would start on 19th November. Project evaluation would be starting on 10th of December, and your internship results are expected to be announced on the 28th of December, and this is for the batch 1. Similarly, for batch 2, there are multiple stages that we have already completed. There are ongoing stages. So project synopsis stage started on 11th of November, goes till 28th of November. Project submission starts on 18th of December. Your mentoring session is targeted on 8th of December. Project evaluation stage, and then your internship results are expected on the 21st of January. So with that, I will move to the Q&A section. I'm very well aware that we are already at past 6 p.m. So we will quickly cover some of these aspects in terms of a few of the queries that have been asked. So many of you have asked about the differences between the load balancer, the traffic manager, and the application gateways. While some of these provide you similar capabilities, as I said, these would be responsible for providing some of these services would provide you very specific capabilities. For example, the traffic manager is a layer 7 device, which provides you ability to not only route your traffic across the geographies, across the different geos, but also has the capability to identify specific roles. Like if I'm running a web service and my web service, before I route a request to a server, I should know if the web service is running right now or not, because only identifying that a virtual machine is running is not good enough. So instead of relying on a layer 3 device, I can rely on a layer 7 device. Similarly, you have questions around the application gateway and the front door. Now, these are services which provide you efficient routing for the application request. Now, front door is an optimized service which routes your request across the geographies. It has a specific focus on providing you secure access as well. So whenever security is an important factor, you should look at the front door as a service. Next, the question is on the NSG versus the ASG. So your network security groups versus the application security groups. These are two different ways to group your different resources. When I want to segregate some of the resources which will be available to specific users, like I want to provide one application to HR team within my organization, another application to say my admin team, another application to my maybe IT department. Then I can group these applications by departments, etc., and then place them in a specific application group. While if I want geographical distribution, say I want different applications for India, different applications for US, different for Europe, etc., then I can better segregate them on networks, etc. Now, there can always be a choice between these. Another aspect could be I want to segregate them in terms of web applications, databases. So there can be different tiers of the application, and I can create different network segments for these tiers. Well, next is VPN. P2S is your point to site, site to site, and express route. So broadly, if you look at these two, the peer-to-peer and the point-to-site and site-to-site connectivities are built on a public internet. So you will create a tunnel on the public internet and then you will utilize the services on that tunnel, which provides you a dedicated connectivity. But Express Route is a network which is provided by Microsoft Azure, and this is a low latency, low redundancy, high redundancy, high availability network, and of course high speed network, which provides you a dedicated connectivity between your on-premises and the Azure cloud instance. So at no point you will use a public internet while using the express route. Availability zones are data centers within a few miles, which will multiple data centers which are spread across few miles, while regions are data centers which are spread across multiple geographies. So maybe when I want to go from one region to another, if my primary region is India or say Asia, I can have secondary region in Europe, Australia, Africa, whichever is closest to me or wherever I want to cater to my customers. The advantages of Azure Resource Manager, well, I may have hundreds or thousands of resources that I create. Would I want to create policies and manage them individually? Definitely not. So Azure Resource Manager gives me the possibility to create resource groups where I can club similar resources which are associated to an application, and then Resource Manager will take the responsibility of managing those resources in terms of the groups, etc. And whenever I want a resource to be created or managed, again, the Azure Resource Manager will take the responsibility of managing those. And last, your compute instances, I will quickly show you. These are some of the VM categories that are available to you. So you do not select vCPUs or memory or NIC cards independently. You will, instead of that, you will go and select one particular offer which is given to you, and it will be a combination of many different aspects. So there are entry level, bustable, general purpose, etc. There are many virtual machine categories which are available to you, and some of these categories are also identified with the different series. So you have A series, B series, D series, and each of these will represent a particular type of compute. So somebody who wants to run a pilot or a say POC or a pilot kind of environment, they can start with the entry level resources. But you may want large memory, you may want large storage, or you may want mainframe type infrastructure. So at that time, you will use H series machines. And these can go up to 128 vCPUs. So starting from 1 vCPU to 128 vCPUs, starting from 4 gigs of RAM to 4 terabytes of RAM. So there are all of these different type of machines or series of machines which are available to you. And with that, I would open the forum. Mentors can point out to some of the questions. If there are any, I can answer those. And then beyond that, we can close the session. So mentors, do we have any questions that you would want me to answer?
No, Alok, no at the moment.
There's one question from the Imagine Cup team. So Athar or Yash, maybe if you want to pick up this question. The student asked that, weren't you lost looking at a lot of Azure services? How did you shortlist that? What are the Azure services that you're going to use in your project?
Right. So I guess I'll take this question. So what I said was what you have to do is don't go for the solutions first, because if you see this cloud service Azure, there are lots and lots of solutions that you can use, right? So there is a thing called as learning hell. You will be just stuck in it. And trust me, I've been there. So what you start with is you just find out what problem you're facing and then what solution you could offer. And once you have done this, then you look for key in your solution, what are the possible things that you're going to require. So basically then you search around. So we knew that we had to develop a website. So for website, you have to deploy it somewhere. So that's when we came across Azure App Services and we then explored further on it. So I think you have to proceed in this way. So to just minimize what you are going to require, and then you build up around those and like see that what services you could like you could use and furthermore. I guess this answers the query.
Sure. Gunjan, are there more questions that you want to take, or are we good to close the session now?
I think I'll just take one more question, which I saw. Just give me one.
Okay. And is that question to Athar?
Yeah, I think teams had more questions with them because I think they can relate to what they have been through.
Yeah.
1 minute. Okay, no, Alok, this question is for you, which says, when will we get to know the results of the project synopsis, whether it is accepted or not?
Okay. So I will go back to the slide here. Right. Okay. So now, so these would be very shortly available to you before the project submission starts. So we will provide you this information. Gunjan, correct me if this is correct. We will provide them this by before the opening of the uh, project submission, right?
Correct. So Alok, this is available. So students, this is currently available under project tab. So when you go onto your project tab, there's a link which says this to the project evaluation guidelines. When you click on that, you would be able to see all the details in terms of what Alok has shared in terms of lot of questions that I saw, and even all these dates you'll be able to see. So project submission, project synopsis is a auto promotion. Once you submit all your details and you submit, if all your details are correct, you'll be automatically promoted to the next stage, which is your final project submission. Right? And dates as currently what Alok is displaying onto the side for batch 1 and batch 2, these are the dates. If you're not able to submit your project synopsis within this date, then in that case, you would not be able to move to the next stage. So you have to submit your project within the dates that are being given. I hope that answers the question.
Right. Thanks, Gunjan.
Right.
So
There's one last question. Alok, I'll just read out this question and I'll take it on behalf of everyone. So the question says, can you tell me the complete name of the competition in which Rishita ma'am and his team participated and they won? And also possible if you can share the contact details of them. So, okay, the second part of the question, Arslan will not be able to share the contact details. However, you can go and check and you can find them on LinkedIn. Onto the first part of the question, what is the name of the competition? The name of the competition was Imagine Cup. This is one another flagship event of Microsoft. You can participate into that. And the good news for all future ready talent registrants is that if your project gets selected from here, you'll get a direct entry into Imagine Cup quarterfinals, right? So you don't have to go through the entire drill of going through initial rounds. You'd get a direct entry to Imagine Cup, and you could also become like Rishita, Athar, and Yash presenting to maybe next future ready talent batch, right? So put all your effort together, read through all the self-learned modules, whatever issues you are getting in terms of your progress not getting updated, or if there are any issues, either post it on the support ID that you have, or either you can put it on the discussion forum. The entire team is there to help you, and we'll be able to we'll be there to support you so that you could sail through this entire thing successfully and create successful projects and get your internship certificate. So thanks, Alok. That's from my side. One last question which I wanted to pick up.
All right, so thanks everyone. With that, we will close the session, and I'm hoping many of you would be completing your projects. You will be submitting your projects, and we will come back with the evaluations once you're done with this. All right, so thanks a lot. With this, we will close the session now.